All right, let's kick off today's deep dive. We're going to be looking at Anant Raj Limited, specifically how they fit into the Indian data center scene and how this whole AI explosion might shake things up for them in the future.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, and get this, our main source today is a letter
A letter.
straight from Anant Raj Limited to the National Stock Exchange of India.
They're basically laying out their own game plan. It's a pretty cool perspective to have.
Definitely unique. So what kind of insights are we talking
We'll
about?
be getting into stuff like how much data India is actually generating compared to the data centers it has, which is surprising.
Right.
We're also going to touch on the whole sovereign cloud thing and maybe the most intriguing part, why the AI boom could actually be good news for a data center business.
I'm hooked already.
Me too. So let's start simple.
Okay.
Who is Anant Raj Limited?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Luckily, the letter gives us a pretty good rundown.
Okay.
So mostly, they're known for real estate, right?
Yeah. That's right, but they've also carved out a pretty big chunk of the data center market, especially with something called colocation services and IaaS,
By ACE, as in,
infrastructure as a service.
hmm,
Basically, they provide the physical space, the power, cooling, all that for companies to put their servers in.
so they're the landlords of the server world.
Kind of, yeah, and they also offer those basic building blocks for cloud computing.
Makes sense. And speaking of data, there's this one stat in the letter that just blew me away.
Ah.
Get this. India produces a crazy 28% of global data, but they only have like 1% of the world's data centers.
Hmm.
That's a huge gap.
Yeah, it does point to a pretty massive potential market for someone like Anant Raj. India, as you said, is a total data powerhouse, but they haven't built up the infrastructure to match that output.
It's like they're generating all this data, but they've got nowhere to put it.
Exactly. And that gap, that's where the opportunity lies for companies like Anant Raj who can step in and provide all that missing data center capacity.
Now, let's talk about AI, the big elephant in the room, right? At first, you might think AI is all software. So how could it affect a business like data centers, which are physical buildings and hardware?
Yeah, you'd think they'd be totally separate.
But Anant Raj actually lays out this compelling argument for why AI is actually good for their business.
Right. So their main point is advancements in AI, and this includes things like DeepSeek, they're going to drive up the need for their services because AI, by its very nature, is a data monster.
Data monks.
It just gobbles up data to learn and operate. And on the flip side, it produces a ton of data as it's working.
Right.
All that information has to be stored somewhere, processed, managed, and that's where data centers come in.
So more AI, more data, more business for data centers.
It's a pretty interesting cycle, and it's not just about those mega server farms anymore.
Like the AI is getting into everything, even our phones.
Precisely. AI is becoming more and more decentralized. Think about smartphones, all those IoT devices, self-driving cars. They all use some form of AI, and they need data processing to happen locally.
So we're talking edge computing.
That's the term, and it means the need for smaller, more spread out data centers is only going to increase.
Makes sense. So instead of one giant data center, you've got this network of smaller ones closer to where the data is being generated and used.
Precisely, which is where Anant Raj sees another big opportunity. Their existing infrastructure, their experience in India, all of that puts them in a great position to capitalize on this new way of handling data. They've got the knowledge, the resources to build and run these smaller data centers that cater to the specific needs of all these AI-driven businesses. And there's another wrinkle to all this. AI isn't just becoming one big thing. It's becoming more specialized. We're seeing all these AI tools popping up, each one laser focused on a very specific task.
Oh, interesting. So instead of one giant AI trying to do everything, you have a bunch of smaller AIs, each one a pro in its own little area.
Exactly. And that actually makes the demand for computing power even bigger.
Huh. I would thought smaller, more efficient AIs would mean you need LLS computing power.
Well, each individual AI application might be getting more efficient, but there are just so many of them now, and the tasks they're tackling are getting more and more complex. So overall, you need a massive increase in processing capacity just to keep up.
So it's like having a fleet of specialized vehicles instead of one general purpose truck.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
You might get better gas mileage from each individual vehicle, but you still need a way bigger garage to house them all.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Anant Raj and what they're specifically focusing on in this whole landscape. They're really leaning into their colocation and IaaS offerings.
So they're not trying to develop AI software themselves. They're providing the foundation for other companies to do that.
That's right. They're basically becoming the picks and shovels providers in this AI gold rush. They're creating the infrastructure that'll let a whole ecosystem of AI companies spring up and thrive.
Smart. And speaking of ecosystems, they're also launching something called Ashok Cloud, which is a sovereign cloud offering. What exactly is that?
Okay, so sovereign clouds are basically cloud services that are specifically designed to follow a country's data residency and security rules. So in Anant Raj's case, Ashok Cloud makes sure that all the data handled on their platform stays within India and follows all the Indian laws.
So it's a big deal for businesses, especially with all the concerns about data privacy and national security these days.
Exactly. It's not just about providing space and power, it's about offering the secure and compliant environment that's tailored to the Indian market.
Makes sense. It's like giving businesses peace of mind, knowing their data is safe and sound, and following all the rules.
Right. And this whole move towards sovereign clouds, it actually lines up with a bigger global trend of data localization where governments are getting more and more interested in keeping their citizens' data within their own borders.
Yeah, I've been hearing about that. Now, the letter also talks about their capital expenditure plans. How do those fit into this AI-driven future they're talking about?
Well, Anant Raj is putting their money where their mouth is. They're strategically investing in expanding their colocation space and beefing up their IaaS capabilities, which makes perfect sense if you believe, like they do, that AI is going to drive this huge need for more data centers, especially ones that are built for edge computing.
So they're not just chasing the latest shiny tech gadget. They're focusing on what they're already good at and figuring out how those strengths are going to be even more valuable in the age of AI.
Exactly. They're playing the long game. And they're also being smart about leaving some room to expand into other areas later on, like platform as a service and software as a service.
So they're staying flexible, but also keeping their eye on the ball, not getting distracted.
Precisely. So we've gone from talking about Anant Raj's specific business to this idea of data localization. But how does all of this connect to the bigger picture, the global economy, all the big tech trends happening right now? Well, what's happening in India, it's kind of a microcosm of what's happening globally. We're seeing this massive shift in how data is created, stored, used. It's changing everything: technology, economics, even geopolitics.
It really is fascinating to see how all these pieces fit together. But before we get too lost in the big picture, let's bring it back to Anant Raj and their focus on those IaaS and colocation services. It makes you wonder.
Yeah, you start to think, could they actually become like the go-to infrastructure provider for all these AI companies popping up in India?
Because if you think about it, as AI development explodes, they're going to need a ton of computing power and physical space.
Exactly, and that's exactly what Anant Raj is setting themselves up to provide.
It's like they're becoming the landlords of the AI revolution, but not just any landlords.
Right, they bring this deep understanding of what AI-driven businesses actually need.
They're building a whole ecosystem. It's not just about plugging in a server and calling it a day.
And that makes them more of a strategic partner than just a vendor.
It's a pretty powerful position to be in.
Yeah, it's not just about making money. It's about shaping the direction of a whole industry.
And it speaks to a larger trend we're seeing everywhere, right? This need for specialized infrastructure as technology keeps changing faster and faster.
I think so. It's like the rules of the game are constantly being rewritten.
This deep dive has been a great example of that. We started with a real estate and data center company in India and ended up talking about global technological shifts.
It shows how interconnected everything is these days. You can't really separate one field from another anymore.
So, for our listeners out there, what's the big takeaway from all this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that AI is changing the world in ways we're only just beginning to understand. It's not just about software, it affects infrastructure, data management, even global politics.
And Anant Raj Limited, they've recognized this shift, and they're making some smart moves to capitalize on it. Their story is a perfect example of how businesses need to adapt and evolve to stay ahead of the curve.
And it highlights how important data centers are going to be in the future of AI. The more AI advances, the more we're going to need those robust, secure, specialized data infrastructures.
And Anant Raj is betting on that future. It'll be interesting to see how things play out for them.
Definitely. It's a fascinating case study in predicting where technology is going and using your strengths to seize those new opportunities.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive for today. We've explored Anant Raj Limited's strategy in the data center market, the rise of AI, and what it all means for the future of technology in India and beyond.
It's been a great conversation, and we hope you've all learned something new about this complex and ever-changing landscape.